And developing tonight in an exclusive Kelly File investigation.
Lynne, how do you feel? Beyond joy. Beyond joy. I am beyond joy.
A radical, now disbarred attorney, convicted of aiding one of the world's worst terrorists, is freed from prison early and treated to a hero's welcome in New York City on New Year's Day. Tonight, we will tell you who in the Obama administration is responsible for cutting her sentence in half as you were celebrating the holiday. This is the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome. We have new details tonight in the story we first brought you here yesterday about attorney Lynne Stewart. In 2010, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for conspiring to actively support this man, Omar Abdel-Rahman, the Blind Sheik. Now, he is the spiritual leader of a violent jihadist group responsible for the deaths of thousands around the world. He is the person who bin Laden says gave the fatwa that led to 9/11. The Blind Sheik is personally suspected in the conspiracy behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. That terror attack killed 6 people, including a pregnant woman and a child. Thousands more were injured. 2 years later, the Sheik was convicted for plotting to blow up New York City landmarks, including the UN and the George Washington Bridge, which would have potentially killed thousands. Then, even from behind bars, he found ways to spread his evil beyond his prison cell. In 1997, his terror group slaughtered nearly 60 people at an Egyptian tourist attraction, attackers hacking people to death with machetes and leaving a flyer demanding the Sheik's release inside of one victim's body. Now, keep in mind that terror that he unleashed in Egypt, because it's going to become relevant in a minute. Years later, bin Laden, as I mentioned, credited the Sheik for justifying the September 11th attacks. So how did the Blind Sheik spread his message when he was locked up and blocked from communicating? Well, that's where his lawyer, Lynne Stewart, came in. She was his attorney, and she was caught carrying messages from the Sheik to the outside world. She was convicted on federal charges in 2005, sentenced to 10 years in 2010 after a lengthy appeals fight. But today she is free after serving less than 4 years. How did that happen, and who signed off on this? Jay Sekulow is Chief Legal Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice. How does it happen that someone as controversial as this, conspiracy to defraud the United States, convicted on conspiracy to provide material support to terrorist activity, to provide material support to terrorists, Jay, how does she get a pass out of prison early?
She gets a pass because the Bureau of Prisons had a policy that changed under Eric Holder about 6 months ago, which changed the criteria upon which these compassionate releases, she's sick, she's ill with cancer, they changed the policies, and she's been able to fit within that policy. And the National Lawyers Guild, which is a far-left legal organization, I mean to the extreme left, petitioned Eric Holder twice for her release. The director of the Bureau of Prisons, who reports directly to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, signed off on the release, and she walks out of prison, order signed, executed. She's out December 31st. And as you said, Megyn, 4 counts of felonies, including conspiring with terrorists. She gave information from the Blind Sheik, from Abdel-Rahman, to Islamic jihadist groups. She knew she was doing it. She did it intentionally. She even tried to, in these conversations, garble the messaging that was being taped, and she knew it was being taped, by the way. She made a mockery of the court when she was first sentenced to 20 months and said, I could do that standing on my head. And as you correctly mentioned, thousands of people are dead around the world because of this Sheik, this terrorist. And his lawyer stopped being the lawyer and became the activist for his position. And that's a dangerous thing. And she's an officer of the court.
No longer.
I think this was a real mistake.
I want to clarify this, because the Blind Sheik, among his many other evil deeds, is unleashing hell at the time in Egypt. People are slaughtering one another, based in part on his edict. Then he goes to prison, and now he can't call the shots anymore. But a ceasefire took place in that battle. She came out with this message from him to those people in Egypt saying, the ceasefire, it showed definitively that he wanted that ceasefire to stop. He wanted the violence to resume. And Lynne Stewart, an American attorney representing him here, decided to be his messenger on that. Without his say-so, I mean, he's like their god, they would not have resumed. She wanted to make sure they knew he wanted the murder to continue.
And she was already aware that she was not allowed to have those kind of communications. Of course, communicating with terrorists is a felony anyways. But she stopped being the lawyer, in a sense, Megyn, when she became the activist for the Sheik's position. And what she was punished for was not her advocacy of the defendant. She was punished for violating 4 counts, 4 felonies. And by the way, they could have charged her with a lot more. But aiding and abetting terrorists, conspiring with terrorists, and she became the mouthpiece for the leader of the terrorist organization, who's now behind bars. She's giving the information out.
Yeah.
And you got groups like the National Lawyers Guild petitioning Eric Holder for her release, and ultimately she gets released.
Well,
the thing is,
now I want to ask you specifically.
Let me tell you about compassion. How about the people that got killed? That's not so much compassion on them, including the World Trade Center.
I want to ask you specifically about who gave the order, who pushed for this. But first I want to show you a little bit of Lynne Stewart as she got released from prison, talking about just how horrible prison turned out to be.
The letter that you wrote talking about prison being a loveless place,
we feel, well, maybe if I write a letter and I put down, you know, just how terrible a place it is, that might move him. I don't know that it moved him, but I tell you, he got the application at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon it was signed and back at the prison.
Yeah, as it turns out, prison is a loveless place, and it's not an enjoyable place, and that's why we send convicted criminals there, to hopefully learn a lesson and to send a message to society. She has a lot of supporters, Jay. I mean, they were chanting, "We love Lynne, we love Lynne," when she got off the plane. I realize she's an old woman, 74. I realize she has stage 4 cancer, and doctors are saying she has 18 months to live. And I'm sorry that she has this diagnosis, but the purpose for putting people in prison is manyfold, and one of them is to send a message to other wrongdoers about where they will wind up.
Well,
now, who specifically made this happen?
You know, Megyn, first 2 things. One is, it had to come from the director of the Bureau of Prisons. The director of the Bureau of Prisons reports directly to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. We know that the National Lawyers Guild, upon which she was a member of, an active member, they've been championing her cause. They're out there cheering for her. And she's, you know, prison's a lousy place. She said, well, Eric Holder modified the policies on these releases about 8 months ago. She then falls under the criteria for release, and you know what? She's no contrition on her end. Have you noticed that? With all her statements. Has she said what she did was wrong? Communicating and conveying messages from a terrorist to a terror organization to unleash and violate a supposed ceasefire? No. But you got to understand what happened here. The director of the prison, the Bureau of Prisons,
that's Charles Samuels Jr.,
reports directly to the Deputy Attorney General, who reports directly to Eric Holder.
So
that's
this is the BOP.
There's no way she got out without Eric Holder knowing this. It's impossible.
This is the Bureau of Prisons working with Eric Holder's DOJ to try to get this woman who is a convicted supporter of terror, of a convicted terrorist, one of the worst convicted terrorists we have in the country, to get her out early, based on compassion because she's ill.
Yeah, and it says the U.S. Attorney, by the way, Megyn, it says in the order right here and in the motions that the United States Attorney, which is the Department of Justice, consents to this motion. So they can't, you know, argue they didn't know about it. They brought the motion. They brought the motion on behalf of the Bureau of Prisons. The Bureau of Prisons reports to the Department of Justice and to the Attorney General. The Deputy Attorney General in charge of this, James Cole, in 2002 criticized in the Legal Times and other periodicals the Bush administration's approach on the war on terror. So are we shocked now that they're calling the shots and releasing the terrorists and their accomplices?
And she says even though she's been disbarred, her new mission is going to be to work on behalf of political prisoners and radicals. And she can't practice law, but she's going to try, she says, to the extent she can. While she is, you know, they say, dying of cancer. Now that she's been freed. Jay, I got to run.
Look, that's a horrible thing that would.
But it's unbelievable.
Exactly. But you know, at the end of the day, is Eric Holder's responsible for this. The Department of Justice responsible. They signed the order, the Justice Department, through the U.S. Attorney's Office.
We asked for a statement from the Bureau of Prisons. They said none would be forthcoming. Jay, thank you.
Yeah. What a shock.
New debate raging.